So, a couple of months ago, this story was circulating around. Archaeologists discover 2,000-year-old marble head of a wine god Dionysus built into a medieval Roman wall, and the 2,000-year-old marble bust found trapped within a medieval wall in Rome may depict the face of Dionysus, the ancient god of wine and fertility. And in more recent days, as of this recording, the inscription honoring Dionysus found in Bulgaria. According to a report in the Sophia Globe, a 3rd century Greek inscription honoring the god Dionysus has been found on a slab that was reused in the floor of a 5th century Christian basilica at the site of Philippopolis. The dedication, which is followed by the names of 44 members of a mystical society, thanks Dionysus for their rescue from the invasion of the Goths, and asks for protection for the new Roman emperors Valerian and Gallian. Quote, "What is interesting is that the position of members in the organization are also listed, and they are very diverse," said epigraphist Nikolai Cherenkov. Quote, "There are several heads of mysteries, different kinds of priests, people who have an obligation to wear specific sacred objects," end quote. The inscription is only the 3rd one to be found at the site that can be dated to the period after the invasion, Cherenkov explains. So it's interesting here how the mythology of Dionysus is actually honored and kept by a mystical society that traces back to the 5th century, reminding us that this is an ongoing thing and it's been going on forever. Speaking of which, Bacchus, according to the International Standard Bible Encyclopedia, is the god of wine. His worship had extended over the whole Greek and Roman world centuries before the Christian era and had degenerated into an orgy of drunkenness and unnameable immoralities, possibly under the influence of Oriental Baal worship, such as the Hebrew prophets condemned. It had been surmised that Dionysus was originally not a Greek, but an Oriental deity. His worship had been introduced into Egypt perhaps by the Ptolemies, and Ptolemy Philopator, 222 through 204 BC, had branded the Jews there with his emblem, the sign of the ivy. When Antiochus Epiphanes made his assault upon Jerusalem in the year 168 BC, he determined to extirpate the worship of Yahweh, which he recognized as the strength of the Jewish resistance, and to replace it by Greek religion. All worship of Yahweh and the observance of Jewish rites, such as the Sabbath and circumcision, were prohibited. Heathen worship was set up all over Judea, and in the temple of Jerusalem on the altar of burnt offering, an altar to Jupiter was erected, the abomination that maketh desolation, according to Daniel 11:31, and a swine was sacrificed upon it. The immoral practices associated with heathen worship in those days established themselves in the temple. When this feast of Bacchus or Dionysus, with all its revelry, came around, the Jews were compelled to go in procession in honor of Bacchus, Dionysus, wearing wreaths of ivy, the emblem of the god, according to 2 Maccabees 6, verse 7. And in further commentary, the youngest of the Greek gods in Homer, he is not associated with the vine. In later Greek legend, he is represented as coming from India, as traversing Asia in a triumphant march, accompanied by woodland beings with pointed ears, snub noses, and goat tails. These creatures were called satyrs. And in the early myths, Dionysus was one of the lesser gods. He is mentioned only twice in the Iliad and twice in the Odyssey, but he is always represented as being more nearly akin to man than the great Augustus deities of Olympus. And then further commentary, he is a man-god or god-man to the inhabitants of the vine-clad slopes of Attica, to which his cult had been brought from Phrygia through Thracian Boeotia. He was particularly dear. At their vintage feasts, last year's cask of wine was opened, and when the new year brought life again to the vines, the bountiful god was greeted with song of joyful praise. The burial of the wine in the dark tomb of the jars through the winter, and the opening of these jars at the spring festival symbolized the great awakening of man himself, the resurrection of the gods' worshippers to a fuller, more joyous life. The vine was not the only manifestation of the god. Oil and wheat were also his. He was the god of ecstasy, the giver of physical joy and excitement, the god of life, the god of certain laws of nature, germination and extinction, the external coming into being and the dying away of all things that are, fructification in its widest aspect, whether in the bursting of the seed grain that lies entreasured in the earth, or in the generation of living creatures, hence the prominence given to the phallus in the solemn processions in honor of the god. So, yeah, as always, the worship or the central philosophy goes back to phallus worship. So to think that there were 44 members of a mystical society several hundred years ago that all believed in this Dionysus mythology and followed its tenets, it wouldn't be surprising to think that these people are still around today, whether just passed down through secret knowledge or secret groups or clubs or through some kind of bloodline. Maybe there's research out there on that, but it's not something that I can confirm or deny at this moment. However, there is evidence of Dionysus worship all over pop culture. Are you guys familiar with the Korean pop group BTS? Well, according to the Elite Daily, the video of Jungkook, who's one of the members, helping RM with his Dionysus choreography is why BTS shows are fire. Yeah, okay. Pretty much, these guys are doing their little shindig dance, and in the video, according to this guy here, this was back in April. For those who don't know, Namjoon was holding the thyrsus, is a staff associated with Dionysus and his followers, and is a symbol of prosperity, fertility, pleasure, enjoyment, etc. So there you go, the staff associated with Dionysus being held by, a very popular Korean pop group. But that's not all. In Asia, you have the Greek drama Dionysus to open Singapore Fest. And here you have Dionysus, which is derived from the Greek god of wine and theater, made its world premiere at the Toga Art Park in Toyonama Prefecture, Japan on August 24th last year. The play is an adaptation of the Greek tragedy The Bacchae, which comes from Bacchus, which is the other name for Dionysus, written by Athenian playwright Euripides. And it says here, quote, "This adapted version of the famous tragedy was created in 2015 when Suzuki, the Japan Foundation Asia Center, met with producer Restu Kusmaningrum of Pertani, Indonesia, to arrange for a viewing of several traditional performances. Quote, Suzuki asked to see performances that were very spiritual in nature. I asked him why he was interested in them, and Suzuki explained, the theater of recent times has lost its spiritual essence, and so he wanted to bring that essence back to Japan with him, Restu recalled. So deliberately, openly stating that they're bringing the spirituality of Dionysus back in this retelling here. And this year, Dionysus and Thalia were characters in the Gods of Comedy. Who are the gods of comedy? Dionysus and Thalia. Technically, Thalia is the muse of comedy and thereby an immortal but not a god. Quibbling, quibbling, quibbling. Dionysus, on the other hand, is much more than the god of comedy, wine, and orgies. His genesis has been associated with the Egyptian story of Isis and Osiris, the origin of which fades into prehistory and the matriarchal age. Much like Demeter, the goddess of the harvest and fertility, he predates what many of us know as Greek Mythology 101. And this was a play written by Ken Ludwig, who's done several of these big-time plays. And then you have the worldmusiccentral.org. Back in May of this year, Dead Can Dance Envision the Rituals of Dionysus. And it talks about the group Dead Can Dance. I've never listened to their music personally, but apparently it takes you down fantastical rabbit holes that can be gloriously fierce and wholly satisfying, following upon the releases of Spirit Chaser, Anastasis, Into the Labyrinth, and Aeon, the dynamic duo behind Dead Can Dance, Brendan Perry and Lisa Gerard have chosen the ritual and rites of Dionysus as the creative jumping off point for their musical journey. Dionysus, the Greek god who's got the goods on wine, winemaking, fertility, ritual euphoria, religious ecstasy, and theater. That Dionysus. So there you go, another musical group out there bringing Dionysus to the forefront. That's not all, folks. According to lamama.com.au, this is in Australia, the Bacchae, a new exploration of the Bacchae myths steeped in ritual and rebellion, a female and non-binary identifying cast, tell stories of women and cults who have challenged the patriarchal status quo throughout history. Forget the original Bacchus, where the women wait off stage while men try and fail to tell their story. In Robert Reed's epic new text, the women take center stage en masse. This fierce retelling, inspired by Richard Schechner's Dionysus in '69, weaves in classic and pop culture references from Sophocles to the Mason family. Join the cult. And I guess this is a play happening again in Australia until July 21st. And I keep having to double check that these are different things here because it's just everywhere. According to BroadwayWorld.com, Classical Theater of Harlem presents the Bacchae in Marcus Garvey Park. Set in the modern era, Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, returns to his hometown in order to clear his mother's name and punish the insolent city for not allowing its citizens to worship him. The clash between Dionysus, played by a modern-day rock star, and his cousin Pentheus, the uncompromising and moralistic king of the city, examines the consequences of a general public that blindly follows two vastly different leaders. Dionysus represents unbridled freedom and excess, while on the other end of the spectrum, Pentheus epitomizes excessive law, order, and rigidity. As society slides into fear and tribalism, its citizens' rationale becomes clouded as they blindly take orders and pick sides rather than seek moderation and rationality. CTH's interpretation is a lush and modern vision of the classic Greek tragedy that tackles the ills of culture obsessed with celebrity worship, social media, and the fear of the other, causing people to lose the ability to see the truth, that people in power are fallible until it's far too late. All these articles that I'm showing you is between the months of May and July of 2019, mind you. I don't know what's going on. Well, maybe I do. But the evidence is pretty overwhelming here. This is the qctimes.com, and it's not letting me fully see it because of the block here, but I can get what I need out of it. Ancient Greek tragedy still relevant today in Rock Island. Dionysius Guild's next performance is the Bacchae by Euripides at 8 p.m. Saturday and Sunday at the Lincoln Park Classic Theater in Rock Island. Considered to be one of the greatest tragedies ever written, the Bacchae takes a step forward in playwriting according to the Dionysius release, noting Euripides brings the chorus more into the plot and makes Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, an active participant in the show rather than an overseeing authority figure. I don't know, maybe this is common in the time of this era where, just the theme catches on and everybody in performance arts picks it up and it's just the trend of the year or something, but the evidence is pretty overwhelming here that something weird is going on. And if you think about where we're at here in society, some of this starts to make sense according to the Encyclopedia Britannica under Dionysus, or also called Bacchus. It says here, quote, as Dionysus apparently represented the sap juice or lifeblood element of nature, lavish festal orgia rites in his honor were widely instituted. These Dionysia Bacchanalia quickly won converts among women. Men, however, met them with hostility. In Thrace, Dionysus was opposed by Lycurgus, who ended up blind and mad. And it goes on here, in Thebes, Dionysus was opposed by Pentheus, his cousin, who was torn in pieces by the Bacchantes when he attempted to spy on their activities. Athenians were punished with impotence for dishonoring the god's cult. Their husbands' resistance notwithstanding, women took to the hills wearing fawn skins and crowns of ivy and shouted the ritual cry, Eoi, I think, E-U-O-I, forming Thii holy band and waving Thyrosi or Thyrosi, I don't know how to say these things, singular Thyrsus, a fennel wands bound with grapevine and tipped with ivy. They danced by torchlight to the rhythm of the aulos, or a double pipe, and the tympanon, or a handheld drum. While they were under the god's inspiration, lowercase g, the Bacchanites were believed to possess occult powers and the ability to charm snakes and suckle animals, as well as preternatural strength that enabled them to tear living victims to pieces before indulging in a ritual feast, homophagia or homophagia. The Bacchanites hailed the god by his title of Bromios, Taurokeros, or Tauroprosopos, in the belief that he incarnated the sacrificial beast. So what do we do about this? I mean, it's just to inform you really that this is going on, and this is no surprise. This is part of the occult explosion and the re-emergence of the mystery religions, probably done from behind the scenes where big money or popular pop culture art, all that stuff is found, because the people with the influence, there may be some members of this mystical society, or at least using this mystical society as a gateway to more control, more power, all that stuff. But instead of leaving you guys on a downer, I'm gonna end here with Acts 17. There's an interesting passage here at the end of the chapter where Paul stood up before the Areopagus. It says this, starting in verse 32. When they heard about the resurrection of the dead, some began to mock him, that's Paul, but others said, we want to hear you again on the topic, or on this topic. Verse 33, at that, Paul left the Areopagus, but some people joined him and believed, including Dionysius the Areopagite, a woman named Damaris, and others who were with them. Now, this individual named Dionysius the Areopagite, when digging into the lexicon, clearly has a connection to Dionysius, an Athenian from Dionysus or Dionysus, the god of wine and revelry. So a direct connection to Dionysus and the worship of Dionysus. But it's interesting, isn't it, that in this passage, this individual, perhaps representing Dionysus or the Dionysus cult, believes in the resurrection of Jesus Christ and follows Paul. I think that's really encouraging. And I think that's something we got to keep in mind, is that when people see the truth, they can come out of this stuff because it's all revealed in the Word. Have an awesome day, guys. God bless.